Hey, this is Doc Yates. I'm a naturopathic doctor, registered acupuncturist, and a kinesiologist, owner of the Yates Naturopathic Clinic, and the founder of the interactive health website, Able Health. And this is the Simply Health Podcast, a show for females where I work to simplify and demystify the secrets of achieving optimal health naturally, based on my own experience in working with thousands of female patients over the past 15 years of my clinical practice. Welcome to Simply Health. Hey, this is Doc Yates, and welcome to the Simply Health Podcast. And I want to give a big thanks to our partners at ablehealth.us and Definitive Formulas with their program, Perimeno Bliss. So I also want to give a big thanks to all the enablers that are listening out there. And these are our listeners that are not just using this information to better their own lives, but to share it and to better the lives of their friends, family, and co-workers. So today, we're going to dive into back pain. And while this is not something that's specific to perimenopause, it is something that becomes more common with perimenopause. And right off the bat, I would say if you're doing the work to start balancing your hormones, that can play a big difference right off the bat, because as your hormones change, things have a tendency to stiffen up. And if you correct that, the stiffness that's associated with it can make a big difference. But I want to dive into a few other details about back pain, because I'm going with the assumption that you've had a chance to listen to some of the other podcasts and you're taking the steps towards balancing your hormones already. So when it comes to back pain, and now I also want to clarify, I'm not talking about right now severe back pain issues, pain shooting down your legs. I want to talk about that chronic stiffness, chronic pain, generally speaking, more common in people with desk jobs, it's just that the posture plays a role. And I want to talk about the imbalances that you typically see and need to correct so that you're no longer dealing with this. So you want to think of the back as imagine like a giant telephone pole, and there's two wires at the front and two wires at the back. And it's more complicated than that, but that's how I want to think about it. And if some of those wires are too tight on the one side, it's going to tip it over the other way, over backwards. And if they're too tight on the front, they're going to be pulling towards the front. And if they're all just too tight, then it's just going to be putting extra strain right on the pole itself. And if they're all too loose, then the pole's not going to have any stability. That's how you want to think about your back. It's trying to get this nice balanced position, but generally because of sitting posture and the excessive amount that we do of it, certain muscles are in a chronically shortened state and other ones are in a chronically stretched state. And certain ones are not being used. So we need to balance out the tightness and the weakness. So the commonly tight muscles that you need to work on are your hips. The hips and around your hips, that's the biggest joint in your body. And when those muscles get too tight, what happens is that instead of doing a lot of the bending through your hips, your body will always try to do the movement no matter where you're tight. So even if your hips are too tight and they're not able to do the movement they're supposed to, then you're starting to put extra movement and strain through the back. So if it's back pain or knee pain, so the above or below joints, you have to work on the hips. The other big factor when you're working on the hips is that it's very common, especially if you have back pain that's more, if it's at the bottom, but it's more kind of to the side, like it's not dead center, and this is extremely common. That's an area called your SI joint. And when your hips are kind of out of alignment, you will generally get pain. I would say the majority of the time, when one of the SI joints is kind of rotated forward and it's going to be jamming, that is where you're going to be experiencing quite a bit of pain there. So working with the SI joint there is extremely important. But it all still comes down to working with the hips. You can do zero adjustments to the SI joint, and if you get the hip muscles loosened up and balanced, that will do it. The other set of muscles that everybody is aware of they're called the erectors. So these are the main back muscles that run straight down your back, one on each side of the spine, and they go right down basically from your neck down to your sacrum. Those are the ones, that's where you're going to feel it. But the thing is, just because that's where you're feeling the pain and the tension doesn't mean that's the only spot. So unfortunately, when you go for treatments of massage or acupuncture or those things, if they're only focusing on those areas, you typically will only get temporary relief. Because if you're just working on that area that's tight and there's other areas that are tight that are continuously pulling you back out of alignment the moment you start going about your day, the erectors are just going to tighten right back up again. And then finally, the big secret, you have to work on the front muscles, the hip flexors and the psoas. So technically the psoas is a hip flexor, but it's also a spinal stabilizer. So if you have no idea what the psoas is, first of all, it starts with a P. So it's P-S-O-A-S. And if you have chronic back issues, this is worth a Google. So type that in, look up psoas, look up psoas stretches, look up psoas release. This is one of the main muscles you have to work with, because when your body is sitting, you're putting this muscle into a chronic shortened position all day long. And when it's in this chronic shortened position and then you go to get up, it starts pulling everything forward and jamming it. So releasing the psoas is key. I would say, while the stretching is important, a manual release of the psoas, in my experience, seems to have the best effect. So if there's a practitioner around you, like a massage therapist, a lot of times they know how to do it, but they just don't think about the release. So if you're getting back massages done for your back or chiro done for your back, while you're in there, say, hey, while you're here, can you do some extra work to release my psoas? And they'll say, oh, of course, yeah, I want. Sometimes they do it automatically, but majority of the times they don't. They just focus on working where you feel the pain. Hip flexors are the same way. So the hip flexors are the muscles that go down the front of your legs, like your quad, the upper quads. There's again, the psoas is part of it, the iliacus is part of it. You don't need to know these names, but these are ones that you can stretch. So when you're doing like lunge stretching and holding that for a period of time, another thing that works amazing for releasing the hip flexors is that after you're doing the stretch or before, is to do a roller, rolling out your quads on a foam roller. And if you don't know how to do that, at some point we will put a video up showing you how to do it. But you basically are just laying with your leg, one leg on the foam roller, the other leg to the side, and you're just rolling up and down. And then you can do it with your leg straight, and then you can do it with your leg in a stretch position. That has a very good effect at loosening up the hip flexors, and that plays a huge role in hip alignment and therefore back pain. So, again, in terms of the treatment for the hips, the erectors, the psoas, the hip flexors, one of the big things you want to consider is stretching. So you want to deal, that's where yoga exercises come in. A lot of lunging type of stretches play a big role. Yoga, I'd say, would be the best kind of well-balanced thing you can do at home for stretching for that. One of the things that you don't want to do when you're working on yoga for this is people think, oh, I'm going to work on my back, and they keep doing these bending forward stretches, and it's just constantly putting it into a shortened position again. You want to be doing a lot of these stretches. You could type in, for instance, say you're on YouTube, you go to type in yoga for hip flexors, yoga for hips. Like, that's the type of stuff I'd like you to focus on for yoga while you're working on this. The other thing, as we mentioned, hormones play a big role in muscle tension. And then finally, anyone with any type of back pain, as I've said in other podcasts before, magnesium for all. Like, take magnesium before bed. We use a magnesium that's combined with a cramp bark, so it further helps with muscle tension. That should be an across the board, take it every night. Now, we still have to talk about the weakness. As we had the telephone pole analogy with the wires pulling from the front and the back, we need to work on if I could speak, that would be great, eh? We need to work on the cables that are too loose. The most common one that you find for this are the glute muscles. And the glutes are kind of strange in this way, because I just mentioned that the hips can often be a problem with these tight points, but certain aspects of the glutes are too weak. So anything you can do to strengthen the glutes, and again, this is more lunge work, where you can go into lunges and stretch the back leg and strengthen the glute on the front leg, or hip bridges where you're laying on your back and lifting yourself up. You need to do work to strengthen the glutes, or even slow, deep squats. The glutes help stabilize the SI joint. So when your spine comes down and attaches to the very bottom bone, that's called your sacrum, And then the sacrum attaches to one bone on each side, and these are your sacroiliac joint, so the iliac bones. This stabilizes your back. When the glutes are too weak and it's not stabilizing the SI joint properly, then other muscles will kick in to tighten up, specifically the erector muscles in your back. So if your glutes are too weak and you've got trigger points around the outside of the hips, you're going to have tight erector muscles. So you definitely, of all the muscles, you need to focus on strengthening the glutes. Now, the abdominal muscles play a role as well. And everybody already knows, like, oh, your core is too weak, your core is too weak. And you hear that all the time. But yet, a lot of the exercises that people end up doing for their ab muscles, they end up doing too many things that is training the psoas instead, and that only tightens that and makes it worse. So one of the big things that I like people to focus on is, rather than doing sit-ups or leg lifts or anything along those lines, bridge work, plank work, and a lot of isometric work. And now, the other thing too is that when you're dealing with abdominal muscles that you have an effect with rotation, like, you know, those types of sit-ups where you're going and you twist as you lift up and you're bringing one elbow towards the opposite knee, that's a rotation. But what we're trying to do with your back is not to rotate. What we're actually not when you're load bearing. So if you want to do gentle stretches and rotate, I think that's great. But if you're trying to do strengthening, you don't want to be doing a lot of things with rotation. What you want to be doing is called anti-rotation. Those same muscles that help your spine rotate are the ones that stabilize your spine to prevent it from rotating when a force is applied. So what you'd want to do to strengthen those muscles, that's situations where you're going into a plank and you're trying to lock your body like stiff as a board, and then you're trying to lift one arm up and reach it forward, and then lift the other arm up and reach it forward. Or even if you're just doing this from your knees, you want the spine to stay perfectly straight while you're applying force just to one arm. And because what would normally happen if everything went loose and you lifted one arm up, your spine would rotate and you would go down towards the ground. And what you're trying to do is prevent that. You can do anything where you're locking your body and pushing and pulling with one arm will help strengthen that. So, for instance, say you wanted to do a rowing exercise. Sit up nice and straight, pull your shoulder blades back, and start doing your rowing exercises with one arm at a time with a lighter weight. And then as you're pulling, if everything went loose, the tendency would be that your spine would have to rotate with each pull. But what you're going to do is lock and prevent that rotation. You can do the same thing if you're using any type of dumbbells or cables for pressing. You do one arm at a time, and you're doing like a little bit of a press with it forward while locking your spine, and you're preventing that rotation. These are all things that you can work on that will play a role in anti-rotation and real core strengthening. So those are the aspects for that. When you're doing strengthening, when you very first start out, what you want to do is focus on moves where you're just holding it, generally for about 8 to 10 seconds, and then taking a break. So let's go through an example of what this would look like. You'd be going to a plank, probably on your knees and elbows when you're first starting, and then you lift your left arm up and reach it forward towards the front of the room reach as far as you can, and then you hold that for 8 to 10 seconds. Then you lie down and take a break. And the reason we're having you take a break is not because necessarily that you're tired. It's just that once you start holding it, it starts reducing the blood flow to the muscles that you're trying to work. And we want the blood flow to be continuously pumping in there. So you go 8 to 10 seconds, take a break. Go back up into plank, lift the other arm up. 8 to 10 seconds, take a break. And again, we will put together a video program for you for this, but for now, these concepts is what I want you to get. After you get these ones where you're just holding it, these are called isometric strengthening. Then you want to get into slow movement. This is where you're doing the pressing with the cables, the pulling with the cables. So this is how you're going to balance the tightness and the weakness. And while just doing it over a podcast can seem kind of complicated, when we put out the video for this, it will be very straightforward, very easy to follow along with. And in terms of maintaining back health and spine health, it will make a significant difference. So I hope this gave you some understanding in terms of things. If there's things that you haven't tried yet, especially releasing the hip flexors and the psoas as part of your treatments, get on that starting right away. If you're doing things that we just said that are probably counteractive, like tons of sit-ups and leg lifts, stop that and replace it with planks and holds instead. If you're not using magnesium yet, do it. And again, as we already previously mentioned, get on top. If you're perimenopausal or menopausal, get on the hormone balance. It makes a big difference with stiffness and tension. So I hope this was helpful. This is Doc Yates signing off. Thanks for tuning in to Simply Health. If you want to learn more about health, check out Able Health. If you want to see some of the other projects that I've been working on in health, business, music, and life, please check out the links below.